The first time I saw her, the world seemed to slow down, maybe because everything about her moved so deliberately. The yoga studio was filled with soft light, the kind that wrapped around her like morning calm. She was standing at the front, barefoot on her mat, posture perfect, confidence in every quiet movement. Her name was Elena, the instructor everyone talked about, 40, graceful, and radiant in a way that came from peace rather than effort. I remember hesitating at the door, feeling out of place among the experienced students. My sneakers squeaked against the wooden floor, and that small sound drew her eyes to me. They were dark brown, warm but sharp enough to make me straighten my shoulders. She smiled. Not a polite instructor smile, but something more knowing. "First class?" she asked, her tone gentle, her lips curving with amusement. I nodded, trying to sound casual, just trying not to embarrass myself. "Then you're in the right place," she said softly. "We start with humility and learn balance from there." The class began, and I tried to focus on breathing, on form, but her voice guided every movement, slow, patient, melodic. The way she spoke felt almost like music, the rhythm syncing with the rise and fall of breath. I found myself watching her instead of my reflection, how her movements carried strength and grace at once, how the sun caught faint lines near her eyes when she smiled. They didn't make her older, they made her real. At one point, she walked behind me to adjust my posture. Her fingertips brushed the edge of my shoulder blade, light but steady. "Relax here," she murmured. The contact was fleeting, but it lingered, not on my skin, but somewhere deeper where her calm presence reached. I inhaled too sharply, earning a quiet chuckle from her. "Don't fight the pose," she said, moving beside me. "Just breathe into it." The rest of the class passed in fragments, her hands guiding alignment, her calm correcting tension, the soft hum of the studio's quiet music. And yet, every small correction, every brief moment her voice reached me, carried a strange pull. When the session ended, everyone began rolling up their mats, but I stayed kneeling, catching my breath, though not from the workout. She approached, kneeling too, just close enough that I could see the faint sheen of sweat at her temple. "You did well," she said, her tone low and approving. "Most people can't stay still long enough to listen." "Maybe it was your voice," I replied before thinking. Her eyebrows lifted, not offended, just surprised, then softened into a small, secret smile. As I left, her words followed me. "See you next class?" I hesitated at the door, looking back once. She was wiping down her mat, but her gaze lifted just long enough to meet mine. That look, quiet, confident, unreadable, was enough to make me know I'd come back. That was the beginning, not of yoga, but of something I couldn't quite name yet. Something that felt like balance and chaos, all at once. The second class felt different, heavier somehow, like the air inside the studio carried more meaning than before. I arrived early, mats still rolled, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, painting gold across the wooden floor. She was already there. Elena, 40 years old, dark hair tied into a low braid that brushed against her shoulder as she adjusted the stereo. When she turned and saw me standing by the door, her smile was softer this time. "You're early," she said, voice smooth and teasing. "Either you're eager to learn, or you're starting to like this place." "Maybe both," I admitted. That earned a quiet laugh. "Then let's see if you can keep up today." As the class began, I found myself watching her more than I should have. The way her movements flowed, strong but never forced, spoke of control I didn't yet understand. The other students followed her cues, but I followed her rhythm. When she said, "Breathe into the stretch," I did, but it wasn't just my muscles that loosened. It was something guarded inside me. Halfway through the session, she moved near my mat again. "Try this," she said, stepping close, her presence calm but magnetic. She guided my arm higher, her fingertips resting briefly against my wrist. Her touch was firm but careful, not intimate, but undeniably aware. "Don't rush it. Let the movement teach you something about patience." I exhaled slowly, trying not to focus on how close she was. Her voice brushed against my ear, low and even. "Better. Feel that." I think so, I murmured. Her hand lingered a second longer, then released. Good, she said, smiling faintly. That's balance, effort, and ease side by side. The rest of the class unfolded like a dance, breath and stillness intertwined. Every time I faltered, she noticed. Every time I steadied, she smiled. A small, approving glance that made the air between us hum with quiet energy. When the session ended, the others began chatting softly, but I stayed behind to roll my mat slower than usual. She noticed, of course. Something on your mind? She asked, leaning against the mirrored wall. I hesitated. You make this look easy. She tilted her head. Because I've fallen enough times to learn how to stand gracefully afterward. Her words carried weight, not rehearsed, but lived. There was a brief silence before she added, You'll learn that too, if you keep showing up. Her eyes held mine, warm, unreadable, and for a heartbeat, I felt something shift. The teacher and student lines blurred, not in action, but in emotion. It wasn't attraction yet, just awareness. A spark of mutual curiosity neither of us acknowledged out loud. When I stepped outside, the sun hit my face, but my thoughts were still back in that studio, her voice echoing softly, effort and ease side by side. I didn't know it then, but I'd carry that sentence with me, long after the next class began. By the third week, the studio no longer felt unfamiliar. The smell of sandalwood incense, the soft hum of ambient music, the warmth of sunlight across the mirrors. All of it had become a rhythm I looked forward to. But what pulled me back most wasn't the routine. It was Elena. She was different outside of class. Less composed, more human. I found that out the evening I stayed late to help put away mats after everyone left. The room was quiet except for the faint rustle of fabric and the steady beat of her music still playing in the background. You don't have to stay, she said, glancing at me over her shoulder. I don't mind, I replied. Besides, you look like you could use an extra hand. That earned a small laugh. You're learning to read energy, she said. That's good. I shrugged, smiling. You're easier to read than you think. Her eyes lifted then, a brief flicker of amusement mixed with something else. Am I? She asked, voice dipping lower, like she wasn't expecting an answer. There was a pause, the kind that stretched, not awkwardly but meaningfully. She went back to rolling a mat, and I noticed the way her braid loosened slightly, strands of black hair falling around her face. It made her look softer, younger somehow, though the faint smile lines at the corners of her mouth still gave her that effortless maturity that drew me in. When we finished, she offered me tea from a small kettle she kept near the counter. The scent was earthy, calming. We sat cross-legged on the studio floor, facing the wide windows that overlooked the street. Outside, the evening light was fading, gold melting into rose. It's quiet here when everyone leaves, she said after a moment. Almost too quiet sometimes. I nodded, taking a sip. You like the silence, though. Her lips curved slightly. Dull. But sometimes silence can be heavy when there's no one to share it with. Something in her tone softened the air around us. I looked at her, really looked. The way she stared into her teacup, eyes distant, shoulders just a little tense. There was a calmness to her, yes, but beneath it a loneliness she probably never let anyone see. I wanted to say something gentle, something real, but she spoke first. You remind me of someone I used to know, she said quietly. He always listened more than he spoke. It's rare. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. The weight of her words lingered between us, as soft as the fading light. When she finally stood, she smiled again. That same composed warmth she wore in class, but this time I could see the faint vulnerability behind it. Thank you for the help, she said. See you Thursday? Yeah, I said, trying to sound casual. But as I stepped outside, the world felt heavier, and so did my heartbeat. That was the night I stopped thinking of her as my instructor, and started wondering who she was when no one else was watching. The next class was smaller. Only a handful of students had shown up that morning. The light was soft, streaming through sheer curtains that swayed slightly with the air from the ceiling fans. It felt quieter, more personal. Elena's energy matched the mood, calm, grounded, but laced with that familiar undercurrent of quiet intensity that always made me aware of every breath. She wore a slate gray top and black leggings, her dark hair tied loosely this time, a few strands brushing her cheek. It wasn't deliberate. That's what made it so captivating. She wasn't trying to be noticed. She just was. "Today we focus on balance," she said, her tone steady, eyes scanning the room before settling briefly on me. "It's not about strength, it's about trust." Her words lingered. Trust, not just in the pose, but maybe in what we felt beneath it. As the class moved into poses, I found myself trying harder, not to impress, but to match the patience in her voice. The sequence was challenging, slow transitions, demanding precision and stillness. Every time I wavered, I caught her watching me, offering a nod, or a soft, steady. Then came a pose that tested me, one that required focus and balance. She noticed my struggle and walked closer, barefoot steps quiet against the wooden floor. "Keep your gaze forward," she said, her voice low, almost encouraging. "Don't fight the sway." Her hand hovered near my back, close enough that I could feel her warmth without contact. "You're overthinking," she whispered, and then, finally, her hand rested gently against my spine, steady, supportive. The touch was brief, but grounding. "There," she murmured. "Feel the stillness." "I think so," I said, try not to exhale too sharply. Her hand moved away slowly, fingers trailing just enough to leave the ghost of warmth behind. For a second, I lost balance again, not from the pose, but from the feeling of being seen. She smiled faintly. "Balance isn't stillness," she said, her eyes holding mine. "It's the art of correcting yourself before you fall." After class, most people left quickly. I stayed, pretending to organize mats, but really, I was waiting, maybe for her to say something, maybe just for her to notice that I hadn't gone. She did. Still chasing balance, she teased softly, walking closer. "Maybe," I admitted. "You make it look effortless." Her expression softened. "It isn't," she said quietly. "Sometimes I lose it too." The honesty in her voice made me pause. There was no performance in her tone, no teacher's poise. Just a woman speaking truth. For a moment, neither of us moved. The morning light caught in her hair, the air heavy with something unspoken. Not tension exactly, but recognition. "See you next time," she said finally, her voice back to its calm steadiness. But when I left that morning, I knew something had shifted, not in the poses, but between us. It wasn't attraction alone. It was awareness. And awareness, I was learning, could be far more dangerous. The weather had turned gray that week, the kind of overcast calm that made everything feel slower. The studio smelled faintly of rain and eucalyptus, the sound of droplets tapping softly against the windows. Only a few of us showed up that evening, but by the halfway mark, it was just the two of us. Everyone else had left early, citing traffic or errands. Elena seemed quieter than usual. She was dressed simply, a dark green wrap top and fitted leggings, hair pulled into a loose bun with a few strands falling free. There was something about her that day, not her usual serene composure, but a kind of restlessness in her movements. We went through stretches in near silence. Her instructions were softer, less formal. The studio felt different too, intimate, private, filled with the steady rhythm of breathing and rain. When we moved into a pose that required partners for support, she hesitated for a second, then said, "You'll pair with me." Her tone was casual, but her eyes held mine longer than necessary. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. We faced each other, hands raised, palms pressing together to balance. Her hands were warm, strong yet gentle, fingers firm but not demanding. "Push evenly," she murmured, stepping closer. "Not too much, just enough to meet me halfway." Our palms pressed tighter, a quiet push and pull. The sound of rain faded beneath the sound of our breathing, slow, synchronized. I noticed how close we were standing. Her eyes flicked up, meeting mine for a second too long. "You're distracted," she said softly, almost teasing, but there was no real reproach in her voice. "Maybe it's your fault," I said before I could stop myself. Her lips parted slightly, surprised but not angry. Instead, she smiled, faint but genuine. "Careful," she said, voice low. "Flattery can break focus." The moment stretched, fragile and full. I didn't move, and neither did she. Her breath brushed my fingers as she exhaled. Then she looked away, breaking the stillness with a small shake of her head, the teacher mask sliding back into place. After the class ended, she sat down near the front of the room, rubbing her wrist absently. I hesitated, then walked over. "You okay?" I asked. "Fine," she said, smiling lightly. "Just a long day." But her smile didn't reach her eyes. She looked tired, not physically but emotionally. Something in me wanted to ask what was wrong, to close that distance, but I didn't. I just sat next to her quietly. After a moment, she said, "You know, it's strange. Sometimes I spend all day helping people find balance, but I can't seem to find my own." Her voice was calm, but it trembled slightly at the end. I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw past the poise, past the calm, graceful instructor everyone admired. In that quiet, rain-soaked room, Elena wasn't a teacher or a symbol of control. She was just a woman, tired, human, and heartbreakingly real. And in that realization, something inside me shifted, from admiration to care, from curiosity to something deeper I wasn't ready to name yet. It was late, later than any class I'd stayed for. The rain had stopped hours ago, but the pavement outside still shimmered beneath the streetlights. The studio was nearly dark, only the soft glow of the salt lamp lighting one corner. Elena was still there, sitting cross-legged on her mat, staring out the window like she'd forgotten the world existed. I hesitated at the doorway, not wanting to intrude, but she looked over her shoulder and smiled, faintly, tiredly. "You're still here." "Didn't feel right to leave yet," I said, stepping inside. She didn't reply at first, just patted the floor beside her. I sat down, the quiet stretching between us like something sacred. Outside, the hum of passing cars was faint, like the world had softened its edges. After a while, she spoke, not as an instructor, but as a woman trying to understand herself. "You know what's funny?" she said, eyes still on the glass. "People think yoga is about control, but it's really about surrender." I stayed quiet, letting her words hang. She turned to look at me, and, in the dim light, her face looked younger, not because of age, but because she wasn't holding herself together so tightly. "I built my life around control," she continued softly. "Schedules, classes, routines. It made me feel safe. But lately, I'm not sure it's working anymore." Her honesty caught me off guard. There was no trace of her usual composure, just vulnerability, fragile and real. I wanted to reach out, to comfort her somehow, but I didn't know if that was what she wanted. Instead, I said quietly, "Maybe balance isn't about control either. Maybe it's about finding someone who makes you forget you need it." Her eyes flicked toward me, surprised, maybe even moved. Then, for the first time since I'd known her, she laughed softly, a small, real laugh that seemed to shake something loose between us. "You're too young to sound that wise," she said. "Maybe you make me older," I replied before I could stop myself. For a second, she looked at me, really looked, the kind of gaze that holds both hesitation and understanding. Then she exhaled, long and quiet, and leaned back on her palms, tilting her head up toward the ceiling. "You have no idea how complicated life gets when you start wanting things you shouldn't," she murmured. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. A faint breeze slipped through the window, brushing a strand of her hair against my arm. The touch was accidental, but it sent a shiver through me, not from desire, but from the simple awareness of her nearness. After a long pause, she said, "You should go. It's late." I stood slowly. "Will you be okay?" She nodded. "I'll find my balance again." But as I turned toward the door, I heard her whisper, almost to herself, "Maybe that's what scares me most." That night, her words stayed with me. The quiet confession of someone who had spent years holding the world steady, now trembling at the thought of finally letting it fall. The next morning felt different from every other. The sunlight outside was pale, the kind that doesn't warm anything. It just lingers. I arrived at the studio earlier than usual, but something in the air told me things wouldn't be the same. Elena's car was parked outside, but the door to the studio was half closed, the lights dim. Inside, she was standing by the window, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, eyes fixed on the street below. She turned as I entered, offering a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You're early," she said softly. "So are you," I replied. She nodded once, setting the cup down. The silence between us wasn't the calm, kind we'd shared before. It was heavier, full of things neither of us wanted to say. "I won't be teaching for a while," she said finally. Her voice was steady, but there was something behind it, a quiet ache. I took a slow breath. "Why?" Her eyes met mine, and I could see the truth already forming there. "I need to get away for a bit. Things have blurred." The words hit harder than I expected. "Blurred," she sighed, brushing a strand of black hair from her face. "I started this studio to help people find stillness. But somewhere along the way, I forgot what that meant for me. Lately, I've been distracted. I didn't need her to say by what. Or who." I stepped closer, not enough to close the distance, but enough for her to feel my presence. "You don't have to leave to find balance again," I said quietly. She looked up at me, then really looked, and there was warmth in her gaze, but also sadness. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You make me forget the lines I've drawn, and if I stay, I'll cross them." Her words hung between us like smoke, fragile, fading, impossible to hold. For a moment, I wanted to say something, to ask her to stay, to fight the silence that stretched like miles between us. But I didn't. I couldn't, because the truth was I understood. Balance wasn't always about holding on. Sometimes it was about knowing when to let go. She took a small step forward, her hand brushing my arm lightly. A simple, wordless touch. "You've been good for me," she said softly. Reminded me that I'm still capable of feeling. Her voice faltered slightly, and then she smiled, the same calm, knowing smile she wore in every class, but softer now. "Keep coming to yoga," she added, "even if I'm not here." I wanted to tell her I wouldn't, that yoga without her wasn't the same. But instead, I just nodded. As I left the studio for the last time, I looked back through the window. She was still standing there, watching the light spill across the floor. For weeks afterward, her voice echoed in my head, soft, sure, unshakable. "It's not about control. It's about surrender." And maybe that's what it really was. Not an ending, not loss. Just surrender. The quiet kind, where love exists not in possession, but in the peace of letting go.